And we are here once again to continue down the AFI Top 100 list. And today we are doing Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Considered one of the greatest horror movies of all time and maybe started the slasher genre, which, you know, the origins of genres is debatable always. I'm of the opinion they slowly... Whatever. Let's get into Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Noah, this was your first time watching it, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let me know. How does it... So you watched Rear Window recently, and then you switched right on over to Psycho. Mm-hmm. Did you notice Alfred Hitchcock develop as a director at all, or did it seem like, okay, there's just the same kind of hand here?
I think that's weirdly a tough question to ask, because even though all of Alfred Hitchcock's films are classically suspense films, and so they all deal with some similar elements, I think that's kind of hard to say. I think that this is definitely his, whatever you want to call it, magnum opus, piece de resistance, whatever. But I think that by the time he's making Rear Window, it's already like his 43rd film or something. So I think that by the time Psycho comes out in 1960, he's still kind of at the same place in maturity and like in what he knows he wants out of his actors. He clearly is someone who is a meticulous director, and knows what he's doing. So I don't see that he's that much more mature as a filmmaker than he was when he did Rear Window. But I do see that this, as a movie, personally, is far more interesting and attention-getting.
I want to disagree slightly, because there's this subtle element continually throughout Rear Window for me, where it's aged a little more. It feels slightly more clunky. And Psycho, on the other hand, I feel like if you just did a 4K remaster and put it in color, you could convince someone it was like shot and made today. Maybe it's just because there's actually, you know, maybe got dumb brain here. I'm just noticing better cameras or something, but it feels tighter. It feels more modern. And I gotta blame that on the directing to some point as well, because just there's so many shots that you could just straight up see in a movie today. Whereas Rear Window, I feel like I felt it being a set and all these things just a little bit more.
No, that's a good point. And maybe one thing with Rear Window is that actually it was the version that I saw was remastered, and so it was colorized. And there's a weird kind of effect that happens when you do colorize an older film, which is that it's very clear. It's very evident that this is not shot with a modern camera. It's not digital. It is on film. But I will say, to your point, I think one of the things that makes this more relatable as like a modern day film is I think Psycho really pushes a lot of boundaries. And so we get into an era that I think you could definitely argue starts with Psycho, that we start to get a lot more modern film tropes. We start to get things that appeal to audience, that sort of slasher film, murder, mystery genre. Part of that was because Alfred Hitchcock was able to push back on the Hays Code. And so so up until that point, there's a lot of stuff that is sort of taboo to talk about or to show in films. And Hitchcock basically says, no, fuck you, like I'm Hitchcock and I know what I'm doing. And that sort of it pushes the envelope, and it sets the tone for films going forward, where you can start to show things like toilets flushing, for example. But, you know.
And a knife being pulled off a woman's body, but then shown in reverse.
Or whatever, you know, however you want to do, whatever.
Okay, just out of pure curiosity, are you a slasher fan?
No, but honestly, after watching this, I think after having some background, I could be convinced to watch some slasher films.
Agreed.
Wait, shut up. Everyone shut up. I haven't made a shout out to my favorite person in this take. There is a connection to Psycho and one of my all-time heroes and idols and icons who I love and adore, Jamie Lee Curtis. Shout out to Jamie Lee Curtis if you're out there somewhere watching this. I love you so much.
I wasn't going to bring it up. I was like, I'll let Noah bring this up and not bring up his weird... Oh, my God.
I adore Jamie Lee Curtis. But here's my favorite connection between Psycho and Halloween, two films which come out like 20-some years apart, 23 years apart. Janet Leigh, who plays Marion Crane in Psycho, is Jamie Lee Curtis's mother.
Really?
Yes, the actress from Halloween. And they both play kind of a similar role, I would argue, except that Jamie Lee Curtis lives. But those are sort of like the two slasher films that like Psycho, I think, sets the tone, and then Halloween is sort of like what we consider today is like, I don't know, maybe the origin of the modern slasher. Is that right or wrong to say? Yeah.
Well, Psycho technically has two of one of the common tropes of slasher movies, which is the final girl, which you see in nearly every slasher film for decades. It has two, but you're right. One doesn't make it, and that's like the big, clever subversion of the first act. Would you mind telling the audience the brief synopsis of the first act in case they, for some reason, are watching this and have not watched Psycho?
Okay, so the first act of our film features Marion Crane, who is having not technically an affair, but it's kind of this like love affair-esque thing with our man Samuel something. A man comes into her real estate firm. She's a secretary working there. Man brags about his $40,000 that he's buying a house with, and she has a moment of, I guess you would call it weakness or a logical lapse, steals the $40,000 and decides to go on her merry way and gets stopped on her escape route at the Bates Motel.
With the creepiest cop in the world following her.
Right!
Yeah,
Yes.
This dude pulls her over, and yeah, she was sleeping on the side of the road, which is like a little weird. But he's like literally like this close to the camera. He's just there the whole time.
No, I think would you say that that's maybe one of our first subversions, is like we are meant to see this cop as maybe a threatening, potentially like suspicious character. But he's not really, as far as I can tell. Like, he's kind of weird in that he follows her for a long time. But I guess you could make the argument that he's just following to be safe. Like,
I don't know if he's an attempt at a red herring. I really don't. Because, like, at no point am I seeing, like, serial killer cop. I'm just seeing cop who's suspicious she's done something wrong when she's done something wrong.
Sure.
But one thing I couldn't figure out, because I kept thinking about it, especially when you see the shower scene, which is the famous end of the first act where the person you're thinking is the main character is murdered, is partially why this film was shot in black and white, because they just didn't want the gore to be something that made it so the film was like unshowable. So they chose to show it in black and white because it's like, no, it's actually just that's just red food dye. And
I think they used chocolate syrup, which
famously
fact check
chocolate
me
syrup
on that, but yeah, actually don't fact check me because I'm just not gonna.
Noah's never read a single comment on any of these videos.
That's not true. I read plenty of the comments. I really should comment back to more of you, and I'm deeply sorry. I'm not deeply sorry.
You're not deeply sorry.
No. No, wait, I have one thing that I do really want to say about this movie, which is that although this was the first time I have seen this film, and although I loved it, I understand it being so high up on the AFI Top 100, I do have to say I felt a little bit robbed because it is so part of the cultural knowledge, the cultural sort of zeitgeist or ethos, whatever you want to call it. Like, it is everywhere, and not just the scenes are mimicked, but also, you know, some of the like the twists in the movie. Like, I went into this movie already kind of knowing what the plot twist is, and so I loved it, but I sort of missed out on that first audience viewing of it where you're like, oh my god, like that's what's going on here, like, you know.
Would you say everything was like all the twists were spoiled for you? Like even the reveal with the mother at the end with like
the reveal with the mother at the end was spoiled for me.
Okay.
Shout out to 30 Rock, one of my favorite sitcoms, for the scene with Kenneth talking to his mother and that being a funny one. But no, the one thing that I did not know that I think did hold up fairly well was I was so ready to invest myself in Marion Crane to believe that she was the main character that when she dies about halfway through the movie, I was kind of taken aback. I was like, oh, I figured that would have been towards the end. I figured that would have been maybe like, you know, second or third act of the movie. But then I was like, wait, there's still like 50 minutes of this movie left, and I've already witnessed like one of the most iconic scenes in film history, so what are we going to fill the rest of the time with? Maybe that was like one thing that I wasn't expecting.
Well, that's how I had it spoiled for me. I actually didn't know the first time I watched this movie, fortunately, the actual mother reveal at the very end. I only knew that the woman at the beginning is going to die, and then I think I knew Norman was the killer, but I didn't know he cross-dressed.
Okay.
What makes this still hold up, though, so well, even if you know all the twists, though, is Norman Bates is still a phenomenal villain. Like, the performance, the writing, and the shots of him are so iconic and impactful pretty much every single frame.
I mean, I have, this is silly, but I do have literal goosebumps as you're talking about Norman Bates, and I really want to get his name right because it is one of the most iconic performances that I have ever seen. So, right. Anthony Perkins. Anthony Perkins is our Norman Bates character, and holy shit, what a performance.
Yeah.
And the directing, that sort of even just like the angles, the way that he is shot throughout the film are incredible. And he really does sort of, I think, give us one of those first kind of performances where you have someone who is so unsuspecting and plays that kind of like naturally charming, boyish personality, where you really are not expecting him to be a deranged serial killer.
Yeah. He almost comes across like playfully innocent. And that's what
totally
makes it so upsetting. Like we all know watching him now what he is, but it's still horribly uncomfortable.
Yes. I really do think that Norman Bates, despite being based off of a real person, feels like a very fully realized and well acted and performed character.
Yeah.
There is so much depth to him that it is much easier to be scared of him, right? Because you don't just view him as like a one-dimensional, like, oh, he's just evil for the sake of being evil, right? There is, somewhat, like you could argue, like a backstory, a motive for where this is coming from, right? That's kind of handed to you at the end of the movie.
I also really wanted to know how they made the practical effect for his mother's mummy, because it looked so good and terrifying. Really I remembered it looking corny and bad for some reason when I watched the movie when I was much younger. And now watching as an adult, when they turned it around, I still was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like, that's upsetting.
It was upsetting. I again, even knowing what was going to happen, like, I was a little bit shocked at how terrifying that, like, semi-rotting, semi-preserved flesh was.
And then overlaying it with Norman's face at the end just speaks on how, like, understanding of how to create real terror Hitchcock was.
Oh, it was so good.
I was, though, after Norman Bates is caught, I guess we're fast forwarding through a lot of the movie all of a sudden. He is, all chained up, and we start hearing this crazy narration in his head between him and his obviously not any longer alive mother. And I don't know how bad that's representing like actual mental problems or something, but I kept like thinking like this is probably not aged well, but I don't know enough to say if it like how. I'm like, it just feels a little clumsy.
Now, to understand it the way I understood it, hearing it from the mother, that is, from the mother half of Norman's mind.
This also has the curse of a lot of sequels of diminishing quality. Were you aware of that?
Psychos 2 through 4.
Yeah. Have you seen any of them?
I haven't. I've heard actually kind of mixed things that, of course, they're not all great, but that they're not as terrible as they could be.
That's true. Bates Motel. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that show?
I haven't, so I don't want to comment on it, but I think I've heard like decent things.
It's pretty darn good. Well, it was. I believe it's off now. I saw the first season and I was like, okay, this is proven that you can do some interesting stuff with old things.
Cool.
And yeah, it's about young Norman Bates, and what you think it's going to be, it's not. But it's also kind of what you think it's going to be.
Right. They do definitely. Norman Bates is a character who I think falls prey to, no pun intended, but falls prey to, like, he is so interesting that you do kind of want to know more, but you then also run the risk of, if you tell that story and it's bad, then you've kind of lampooned one of the greatest, like, cinema villains of all time, right?
Yeah.
No, there is a remake of Psycho by one of my favorite directors, Gus Van Sant, who did one of my favorite films, Good Will Hunting. And it is basically a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho featuring, I believe, Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. Kind of an odd choice.
That's bad.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really bad. I hate that. So I imagine him talking like Vince Vaughn always talks, but just Norman Bates.
Goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
So what you're saying is you'd like to remake Psycho with Jamie Lee Curtis as Norman Bates, or Norma Bates?
No, I don't want that. I think that I don't want it remade, right? Which is kind of weird because it's already been remade, but I'm actually much more content to have the spin-offs and to get more story on it than to just have it redone, because I think that
I think that what Alfred Hitchcock does for us so well here is breaking a lot of boundaries and setting up a lot of tropes and really tapping into something that, for whatever reason, speaks to pretty much everyone who watches this movie. And I think for that reason alone, it lays a lot of foundation for a lot of really important things that come after it. And so I don't really see the need to have it redone. I think that it does so much so well the first time. And Alfred Hitchcock is known for being an incredibly meticulous and perfectionist director. I'm pretty content to have a film, to have this as like, you know, leave it alone and not have it redone.
Yeah, I disagree. I'm sorry,
Really?
but if we're going to have a remake with Vince Vaughn, then I'm a completionist. It needs to be a trilogy of remakes, and the third one is going to be with Norman Bates played by Owen Wilson. And then I will be done. Then we can leave Psycho be.
Well, it's more than a hobby.
We've talked a lot about how this movie is amazing, and it is, from the performance of the main killer to how it had all these tropes that were so influential, but I do have criticisms, which, of course, in this series, whenever I say I have criticisms, I feel like the biggest douche, because I'm just like, I would like to critique Psycho. I think it's a little too long, which probably is like the weirdest thing to say about a movie that's not that long to begin with, but I felt like it could have been cut down at times, and the dialogue, as we've talked about, really needs some smoothing over to like still feel modern. There's just some of those clunky Hitchcockisms is what I'll call them, where just every now and then he doesn't treat everything with the same level of tact he treats what he really cares about.
Definitely. Okay, so we have moments where like he really wants us to pay attention to something, and so it's very clear that the dialogue and everything surrounding that scene is like really well fleshed out, and then we have moments where it's kind of incidental shots and dialogue and just like filler that is clearly kind of written as such.
And I'm sorry, I know the toilet is so infamous and so many people, I didn't need to see that. I don't know why there's a toilet shot. That could have been cut out. There's a few seconds right there. I don't know why that's there.
Also, just such a weird way to dispose of things, and you get the sense that they were doing that just to push the boundary, just because toilets had never been shown in a movie.
That's
right?
what I was gonna say. My conspiracy brain is like, Hitchcock even thinks it's a bad shot. He's just like, like, I want to put a toilet in here. You can't stop me. That's the vibe I get from the shot, and it's very tone breaking in that moment.
Oh God. I think there's maybe like one or two things that I still want to bring up with you about this film, because it's definitely a landmark film, and I can't help but feel like I'm missing out on, like I'm missing something.
What I was getting at is I think it's a very good thriller. I think it is super influential, and I think the performances are way ahead of their time, but I don't personally think it's actually Hitchcock's best, which is apparently a very unpopular opinion among Hitchcock fans. But after rewatching it, I think I would have used to say that, but after this rewatch, I'd go Vertigo.
Really? Well, then I can't. That is another Hitchcock that is on our list, and that I cannot wait to watch, because, as I said, I am a Hitchcock virgin, so I'm looking forward to it.
Sure.
Do you want to close this one out, Daniel?
Actually, well, yeah, let's get to the final questions.
Sure.
So if you were going to say whether or not Psycho was going to be remade, I believe you have answered this already, but I'm going to give you one final chance to change your mind, because I'm going to point out that Bates Motel could be considered a remake, technically, theoretically, maybe. There's been sequels that have been kind of well received. Noah, would you remake Psycho?
No. Hard pass.
What if we got...
Leaving it as it is.
What if we got Willem Dafoe to play Norman Bates?
Oh, well, in that case, no. Still no. Although, actually, I think that's pretty good casting, Daniel.
I thought it was too. It came to me and I was like, that's good. What if we get Adam Sandler to play Norman Bates?
If we get Adam Sandler to play all of the roles in this movie, then absolutely, I would 100% watch it, but
we'll
nothing
call it
short
Hubie's
of that.
Psycho.
Yeah. So, unless Adam Sandler is playing all of the roles, I don't want it remade.
Okay, that's fair enough. I disagree. I think this is one of the ones that if you put it in the best of horror, like I'd love to see Edgar or Yeah, Robert Edgar's version of Psycho. I think because I just saw The Norseman, and so he's in my head. And my God, does that guy do horror well?
Cool. I can't wait to watch that movie. I'm super looking forward to it.
If you could pitch a Jamie Lee Curtis involved Psycho movie, what would it be?
Where she's an actor in it?
Yeah, would she be playing? Would
someone?
she be a new like Ginger Bent Norman? Would she be the first girl so she could like echo after her mother, or would she be like the second actual survival girl?
I would love to see Jamie Lee Curtis playing like Norma and or Norman Bates. Actually, I would love to see like kind of a prequel sort of where we get an image of who Norman Bates' mother was, and I would I would love for JLC, that's my nickname for her, to play.
Do you notice how much he's smiling while he's talking about Jamie Lee Curtis? My boy's in love. Return his calls, Jamie Lee.
But Daniel, I wanted to ask you, would you keep this movie on the list, and would you keep it in the position that it's at currently, which is 14?
Yes, I would. And keep that in mind when I say this part. It's still in my top 100 movies, but it would be 90s. Because I think like it's great, but I don't take anything away from it aside from that was a really great horror movie. And I'm a pretentious snob. So like a lot of my top ones are ones where I'm like, that emotionally changed me as a man. And Psycho has yet to emotionally change me as a man.
That's so funny. I want to disagree with you because I think if anything, I want to either leave it where it is or push it higher, because as someone who I think last time we talked about was like having trouble separating between influence and like actual quality of the film, I think that this is a film that when I saw it recently and then when I did research on it, I was like, wow, it is really hard to separate any film that comes after from what Psycho did for it. And so I was like, I actually, flaws and all, even if it's not Hitchcock's greatest, I think that I'm going to leave it where it is. So
that's interesting. I didn't think you would be someone who valued influence more than me, but
I
we've
try
learned
not
something
to,
about
actually.
our dichotomy here, Mr. King. I totally respect that. Like, yeah, it's certainly something that if you're talking about the importance of movies, yeah, I think you're correct. Absolutely, bring it much higher. In fact, I would say it's probably in like the top 20 most influential films, if I can certainly think of pop culture. But no, in terms of quality, which I'm more heavily, I think, relying on, then yeah, I would have it a bit lower. Just because, again, I think there's some stuff that could be trimmed. There's some shots that just look weird now because they're no longer like scandalous or anything. It's just like, that's a toilet. And I think there's dialogue issues. But aside from that, the performances alone put it in the top 100 for me. Not only because, and I think I'm actually agreeing with you in that sense, because not only is the performance that good, but its influence on future performances of crazed people or, any kind of that vibe character is just massive.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, do you have anything else that you want to say about Psycho?
I think The Simpsons parodied it really well. So now, hard smash cut to that, and that'll be the end.
This is great. This is fun.
All right. That's the end of this one, everybody. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you'd like to support what we do here. Follow Noah on Instagram. It's basically just a fan account for his girlfriend, which is the cutest thing
That's
ever.
true.
Yeah. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.